Good evening. I'm still reporting on the coup. This is a superpowered dose of unafraid truth which every American needs to see. Please post this far and wide and urge all your friends and family to watch it. The J6 riot was a setup by the FBI. It used one of the oldest tricks in dark politics, the creation of a riot by agent provocateurs. People who dressed like Trump supporters in this case, whose real intentions were to get as many real Trump supporters as possible to do the wrong things, to really riot. Fortunately, that's not the nature of most Trump supporters. They know when something nefarious is going on, and under those conditions, instead of taking the riot bait, most Trump supporters acted like respectful citizens visiting the U.S. Capitol building, some for the very first time. Yet still today, hundreds of these God-fearing Americans were locked up and are still locked up without benefit of a trial, sitting in a filthy D.C. jail. There is now a mountain of evidence that there were hundreds of bad actors, some from the FBI, some from various police and intelligence organizations, who were there simply to assist in this attempt to instigate a riot. For the most part, they failed miserably because they didn't realize that they were dealing with honest, hard-working Americans who just want their peaceful America returned to them, the one that venerates freedom and justice for all. Representative Clay Higgins was first elected to Congress with 56% of the vote during the Trump landslide in 2016. In 2018, he beat 6 challengers, winning re-election without a runoff in Louisiana's open primary election system. In other words, he was still very popular in his home state. In 2020, Higgins won re-election again with a landslide 68% of the vote. That is a huge accomplishment in this kind of voting system. In 2022, Higgins won re-election with 64% of the vote against 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans. So today he is serving his 4th term in Congress. The first time I saw Clay Higgins was a couple of weeks ago when he was interrogating FBI Director Christopher Wray, the polished, evasive, rambling New York attorney. Wray stood as a stark contrast to the Deep South Louisiana draw of former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, many times over a police officer and SWAT cop, Clay Higgins. Although Clay speaks with that deep drawl, you'll quickly notice how well-spoken he really is. Reporter Laura Logan interviewed Clay Higgins.
This is a letter from Benny Thompson, who was chairman of the January 6th Select Committee, and he sent this to TSA, to the Honorable David Pekoski, who's the administrator of TSA.
Although the date is hard to read, it says January 11th, 2021, 5 days after the January 6th riot and 9 days before the inauguration.
They want a briefing on efforts to address the travel of white supremacists and other domestic terrorist groups, options for quickly denying air carrier service to individuals posing a potential threat, and current status of efforts to identify and add to watch lists.
In other words, every Trump supporter was automatically classified as a domestic terrorist.
That letter was the beginning of an executive action by the TSA to use its authority to instruct America's air marshals to track and follow Trump supporters that had been charged with no crime. They were guilty only of arriving by air into D.C. on January 4th, 5th, or 6th. And those manifests were turned over to the FBI. The FBI went through those manifests, and every American that the FBI identified as a Trump supporter that was on those manifests was added to the FBI's suspected domestic terrorist watch list. The FBI created a profile on those people, a suspected terrorist profile. And then the TSA administrator used his authority to instruct Air Marshals of America to track those Americans wherever they fly. And
Still today.
it's still happening. This is who our Air Marshals are following, the Trump supporters. And that letter, signed by Benny Thompson, who was chair of the J6 Select Committee, and signed by John Katko, who at the time was a ranking member.
Republican.
It means the lead Republican of the Homeland Security Committee, advising the Pekoski, the TSA the senior guy, to use all of that authority to track Trump supporters that had not been charged with a crime, who were guilty only of arriving in D.C. by air.
And every time they fly, they're being tracked.
That's right.
You're putting physical detail onto people? That's the
right.
most expensive form of surveillance that
That's right.
exists.
And let me clarify. It's very comforting to Americans to think that there might be an air marshal on our flight.
Not if they're
well-trained,
tracking you for
well-armed
your
guy.
political
but not if
beliefs.
they're being used for nefarious purposes. The people that are complaining about this are the air marshals themselves. These are the whistleblowers that are coming forward to tell a congressman that they felt would pay attention.
This has
just
been
like the
going on
FBI.
since January 21.
That's right.
And you just found out about it. What else is going on that
Well,
we don't know about?
We don't know, but I'm telling you, we're in uncharted waters as it relates to the weaponization of our government against the American people. I am not frightened of these people. I've spent my life serving others, and I love my country. This thing is not going to just slip away. They're not going to take us without a fight. I'm going to fight legally and peacefully and within the parameters of the Constitution that I've sworn to serve. But they're going down. These men in their high perch, in their position of power and authority, and are walking upon our entire history, our deepest core principles. They're not going to get away with it.
They have so far.
We'll see.
Powerful people in this country, they want to make sure no one hears your voice. They want everyone to look at you like a far-right, crazy conspiracy theorist. Is that who you are?
No, man. I'm a regular American man. I'm an investigator, police officer by background. I'm going to continue to speak the truth, whether anybody likes it or not.
You've always been controversial. And even when you were in law enforcement, you did those Crime Stopper videos that went viral. People loved them. You got a lot of heat for them, too.
The Gremlin Street Gang is responsible for hundreds of violent crimes. Murders, armed robberies, witness intimidation, burglaries, drug trafficking, extortion, and brutal beatings. We've arrested 10 of these thugs and have warrants on 7 more. You will be hunted. You will be tracked. And if you raise your weapon to a man like me, we'll return fire with superior fire. Darren Carter, you think men like these are afraid of an uneducated, 125-pound punk like you that's never won a fair fight in your life and holds your gun sideways? Young man, I'll meet you on solid ground anytime, anywhere, light or heavy. Makes no difference to me. You won't walk away. And for those who would use this message as a way to create false racial division in our country, take a close look behind me. Standing next to every cop is a leader of our black community. This is not about race. It's about right versus wrong.
Was that your idea? Were you the reason behind that?
Those videos, those public service announcements were part of my job that the sheriff asked me to perform.
Because you were the press officer.
Public
affairs
I was
person.
a public service, but that was late in my career. I didn't ask for that position. I'd been a SWAT cop for a long time. In fact, when the sheriff asked me to take that role, at first I thought he was joking. And I told the sheriff, I don't know how to do that. And he said, well, it's easy. You show up where the TV people tell you to show up, and you stand where they tell you to stand, and somebody holds a script for you and you read it. I did that a couple of weeks. I read the script. But I was uncomfortable with that because it wasn't real. It wasn't reflective of what I had been telling actual suspects for many years in the dead of night. That direct conversation that a lone cop will have with a young man has taken a wrong turn in life and has to be arrested. That's a very special communications for a good cop. You speak candidly and honestly and from your heart with compassion, but discipline and confidence. I mean, if I show up in your life at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's not because you've had a good day. I don't consider you to be a bad man. You've just done something that has crossed the line and according to statute. And I'm gonna help you through the booking process and hopefully lead you to a better day. Their only path really to freedom was through my jail. And real freedom, spiritual freedom would be if they could break the bonds of darkness, you know. So the way I delivered the message when I began having to record video segments, I just communicated in that same honest manner. And what started happening is people started turning themselves in. Some of those videos were translated into 8 languages, I'm told. IT people told me they were viewed 150 million times across the world. And
No one had seen anything like it.
It's crazy, yeah. It was just honesty. And that's what I do in Congress.
There's another video of you that went viral not so long ago, which is when you had that press conference on the Hill.
It's 18
And that
hours.
activist kept coming up and you leaned in and took your sunglasses down. You told him, I'm gonna give you an interview, I'll give you what you want, but this is what you gotta do. And then he came back.
You had a Freedom Caucus press conference immediately following a Bernie Sanders rally. So they had, not necessarily a good mix. One could anticipate there might be some activists there that would not necessarily agree with the kind of things we were saying in our press conference. And one of those little fellas figured out that there was no police around, so he wanted to be more aggressive than he should have been.
Can you talk about when your family did an ad all endorsing your opponent?
And he came on the inside, the barriers, into the press area. He was not a journalist.
He was walking right between the group of congressmen.
Yeah, he came. He was trying to get around to Lauren Boebert, and I had already dressed him down a little bit and put him in a box.
You can't answer the questions that he has.
No, I can answer the questions, bro.
Okay.
Listen, I
What is
respect
your
you
name?
first. I'm Clay Higgins. I represent South Louisiana.
Clay Higgins,
All I'm asking
okay.
you to do is just peacefully stand by with your camera, and I promise you, look at me, I'll come talk to you straight up. I'll answer all your questions.
That didn't last maybe a minute, and he decided to get even more aggressive. So I had to escort him out of the area, and I did that and turned him over to the police. That was the end of it. Generationally, we have allowed our federal law enforcement agencies to gradually become commanded by corrupted men. And they've been corrupted not so much by money, but by power. And that power really began manifesting itself insidiously within the FBI and the DOJ and our intelligence services since 9/11, since the Patriot Act. We gave them great authorities and power. Those powers are no longer being used to thwart terrorists. They're being used to oppress the individual rights and freedoms of regular Americans like me and like the citizens I've sworn to serve. So I have a problem with that. Regular, patriotic American men and women are not terrorists. Let me say the factions within our highest levels of federal law enforcement and our FBI and DOJ and intelligence services, these corrupted men we're discussing, they could be more readily identified and more accurately described as domestic terrorists than me. They're the ones treading upon my individual rights and freedoms. They're the ones spying on Americans. They're the ones traveling great distances to insert themselves into the lives of Americans that are just communicating freely, as is our right, online or anywhere else at meetings as we congregate and gather. I don't support battery on police officers nor violent disruption of government operations. But I will remind everyone that a free American has a right to resist an unlawful arrest.
At the last hearing where you addressed Christopher Wray, you produced a photograph of what you called ghost buses.
These two buses in the middle here, they were the first to arrive at Union Station on January 6th, 0500. I have all this evidence. I'm showing you a tip of this iceberg.
A ghost vehicle in law enforcement is not an uncommon reference. It's a vehicle that's been purposefully concealed to whereby it's not easy to identify. So no license plate, it's been painted over from its original cover. In this case, these two buses were totally painted white, in like a cheap, fast overspray over all of the markings. So when you have two charter buses show up, the very first buses to show up in Union Station on January 6th.
Around 5 a.m.?
Around 5 a.m. The initial witness, another charter bus owner, arrived at 5:20. He thought he would be the first to arrive because he knew the schedule of all the other charter buses, and he knew that most of buses would begin arriving around 6. So this charter bus operator was a very experienced man, very squared away. When he arrived with his couple of buses, these two white buses were, to his surprise, already there. And he immediately noticed that these buses were odd because they were totally painted over. It was a bad paint job. There was no markings, no phone numbers, no company name, totally outside the parameters of the way charter buses are required to operate and by law. So he said, these buses are weird. And no one was getting out. So something else that happens within that charter bus driver community is the drivers know each other. And the passengers may stay on the bus if they're especially in a parking lot, they're not ready to disembark yet.
Sure.
The passengers might stay on the bus, but the bus drivers get off. And they talk to each other. They talk to the other bus drivers. So there are things that happen normally that the absence of that happening was odd. So he was suspicious enough of these buses as a professional that he collected some digital evidence of those buses and then estimated with him and other eyewitnesses between 40 and 50 guys that they described as Trump supporters. They all disembarked from the bus and they gathered in front of the two buses and they had like some kind of discussion, a briefing, like the way a military leader would address his troops. And then they together went to the escalators and up in the Union Station and were gone.
And they were all men?
They were all men in all the Trump regalia. These men were in really good shape. They made comments like, wow, these are real serious Trump supporters, these guys. And they said they all had elbow pads and knee pads, and they appeared like they had common equipment, but they were not in uniform. But they behaved in a uniform manner. And we intend to get all of that video evidence from Union Station, from the escalators, from the parking lot. We have other eyewitnesses. Much to the chagrin of everybody that was in those buses and everyone who commanded them to be there, we've identified one of those buses. And you know what that means? That means that's their ass, because a bus is a serial numbered vehicle. And in America, the change of ownership of a serial numbered vehicle is documented. So that means we can begin to trace from the original owner of that bus, where it was sold and who bought it, and then who it was leased to and where it disappeared. And then eventually those buses were removed from the Union Station, and we're going to document all of that. So I feel very, very confident that everybody that was on those two buses were FBI assets. And I have a high degree of belief that they were actual FBI agents. And I'm sorry to say, ma'am, my objective conclusion is that senior officials at the FBI were deeply involved there. You had a combination of FBI confidential informants, either registered, unregistered, or a volunteer informant, or actual FBI agents, depending upon the group and how significant the group was. Like the agents inserted and say that in the Proud Boys groups that were going to come to D.C., those are most probably actual FBI agents. Whereas some, random Facebook group of patriots from Arizona or something was most likely an informant. So it would still fall under the umbrella of an FBI asset if they were communicating with the FBI, data that they were harvesting and information that they were recording and delivering to the FBI, screenshots of text chats or actual recordings of phone calls, things like that they were delivering to the FBI. All part of the web of surveillance of the American people. I can tell you that the FBI had established a formula in 2020 that they pursued with all their power and authority to infiltrate groups across the country of Americans that were essentially discussing online. They'd formed online groups.
Like chat rooms?
Like chat rooms.
Discord and
Facebook
Telegram.
pages, et cetera, to discuss their frustrations with COVID oppression. And so the FBI identified groups and infiltrated them and with undercover operations that were very effective. And they began planting seeds of discord. If you track the text threads, which I've seen some of, again, through evidence that I've been able to witness, but I cannot share publicly because it would be in violation of court orders from individuals.
But to be clear, this is video you've seen with your own eyes.
Yes, ma'am. Evidence that was in criminal cases.
Is this what it's based on? It's based on the digital evidence, what you have on camera, and supporting evidence for that? I mean, other kinds?
Yeah, eyewitness testimony, sworn testimony, affidavits, text messages, emails, and digital footage. Yes, ma'am. They were the threat.
Based on what?
We were just Americans. We were Americans that were angry, and we were enraged that our freedoms were being oppressed, and the FBI and the powers that had become corrupted, those bad actors within the federal government that had this authority, they said that these Americans, how dare those Americans challenge the oppression that we're putting upon them? The moment that I'm able to reveal that stuff, I will. I mean, if you clearly have men dressed as Trump supporters walking around inside the Capitol on the other side of police officers who are, to one extent or another, not engaged with them, like they're not concerned about them. Then you have a set of closed doors, like exterior doors and interior doors closed, and you have police officers positioned outside and then in between the two doors, and then on the inside of the second set of doors. The doors weren't open yet.
What time was
video, this was a couple of the videos that like Trump was still speaking. And then on the inside, looked like Trump supporters walking around in groups of 5 or 6. So these were clearly separated physically and by doors and by police officers from the guys on the outside. So any reasonable man would come to the conclusion when you have videos of the doors being opened and police officers allowing Trump supporters that had gathered at the door to now enter, no violence, just walking in, just come on in, some fist bumps and come in, a second set of doors open, and then there's a group of Trump supporters on the steps, the interior steps, saying, come on, this way, this way.
What does that tell
Any
you?
reasonable man would look at that and say this was a coordinated effort by law enforcement to have these people come in. So who was that? It had to be, I think it's nefarious forces and part of the whole agenda of the FBI with their involvement of this whole thing. We have other evidence, specific observations of police officers, Capitol Police or Metro or both, entering rooms and here in the Capitol in uniform and coming out as Trump supporters and construction workers. So,
You've seen that.
yeah. So
Why has that video not been released yet?
One would say that's a pretty good clue.
Yeah.
The other reason that we believe is just practical to have someone that knows how to get around. I mean, you know yourself, you can't walk around this place and know where you're going. You have to be here for years and
The
years.
Capitol is a maze.
That's right, and it's incredibly difficult to get around. You have to know where you're going. So you had to have people that were very familiar with the Capitol itself in order to lead some random groups of citizens that have come from every corner of the country, in many cases never been to D.C. before, much less walked around in the Capitol. So it just makes sense that the Trump supporters that were leading the way and were clearly already inside the Capitol before the doors were opened were working in coordination with the FBI agents and assets that were embedded into the crowd. In some cases, in these groups had been embedded for months. This is ugly stuff we're discussing, but the American people deserve to know the truth, and I intend to see that it happens.
A lot of people just won't believe it. Without seeing, they got to see the evidence, or they just don't believe you.
I don't want to believe these things. I've been a cop for a long time. When I was a little boy, the FBI shield was the baddest ass badge a cop could ever earn. It was an honored achievement to become an FBI agent. So it's great. It's with great pain I describe the corruption that has taken hold within our FBI. And we intend to clean it up because these rank and file FBI agents, let me tell you, a lot of these men and women are quite disturbed about what has happened to their beloved FBI. Same thing inside the DOJ. And we have an obligation as Americans to embrace truth, whether it's ugly or not, so that we can take corrective action. Some things have not happened that conservatives within the People's House would like to happen. We've had some disagreements internally regarding who shall be our speaker. We just had to go through what we went through in order to arrive at that particular juncture of American history where a man like Mike Johnson became our speaker. Mike gets it that all the digital evidence of J6 has to be released to the American people. Talking about altogether between 40 and 50,000 hours of digital evidence. No one has a staff large enough to go through that evidence. So it has to be crowdsourced. You have to give this stuff to the American people. And then the truth will be revealed clip by clip.
Mike Johnson has released precisely 12,500 hours of that 40,000. And he's not releasing 5%, which is 2,000 hours, whether it's for a good reason or a bad reason. It provides opportunity to hide whatever you want in those 2,000 hours. I'm not saying he's hiding something, because I don't know. But I'm just saying is when you're withholding 2,000 hours, you can put whatever you want in that 2,000 hours. There are American citizens who are sitting in jail, some of them for 3 years without a trial.
The truth of what happened on those days, J4, 5, and 6, is in the digital evidence that Speaker Johnson has control of. And thank God we have a speaker who has stated that he is committed to release all of that data. Now, he's restrained to the extent that he's restrained by attorneys, but he's an attorney himself. And we'll see. When you say he's not going to release it all, I say let's see.
Well, those were his words, not mine.
Well, I know the man's heart, and it is pure. And he knows that America needs full truth. I believe, I speak on behalf of we the people, when I say we demand full release, the whole thing, not just from the Capitol grounds and within the Capitol proper, by the way. We want it all. We want all the DC Metro digital evidence. We need evidence from Union Station and some other spots that we've identified.
Can you tell me any of those spots that you've identified? Union Station being one. What other spots?
Parking areas and areas for disembarkment.
What do you mean by that?
Escalator areas where you can connect the dots from agents disembarking from vehicles and going either on foot to their stations in their teams of 3 and 4 and 5, or getting into other vehicles that were dispersed and where some actions were noted that were born of those vehicles, where some actions were taken, nefarious stuff.
What can potentially happen there? If you are a J6 defendant who's in prison or was convicted of a crime, but you find out later that Brady material was withheld from you in violation of the law, is there legal redress?
Yeah, that would flip the case. So the bottom line is that if Mike Johnson is successful at getting all the digital evidence from J4, 5, and 6 released entirely to the American people, including the body cam footage of every police officer that was either operating in uniform or not in uniform, shall we say, then all these J6, I call persecutions, these political prisoners, those cases will be flipped because it's exculpatory evidence. It's been withheld, and the prosecution has a legal responsibility to provide exculpatory evidence that they're in possession of to the defense. And in this case, in every one of these J6 cases that have been prosecuted, the FBI and the DOJ has most certainly been in possession of all the digital evidence that we're describing right now. If we're successful at releasing this evidence, the American people are going to be stunned into acceptance of the reality that our FBI and our DOJ and in some cases head people in our intelligence services have been corrupted by power.
Have you seen all the video? I mean, I know it's a lot.
I mean, it's a lot.
Have you seen the key parts?
I've seen many segments of video that most Americans have not seen that is incredibly condemning. They're so desperate to keep this digital evidence away from Americans, just regular citizens' review, that they're going through quite complex legal maneuvers to stop Americans from viewing this evidence. So every American that's watching this should ask themselves why. Whether you're liberal or conservative, why are you concealing that evidence from me? Why can't I see that? It's video from my own capital. And people have a tendency to forget, especially my liberal brothers and sisters across the country. This is your country. This is your capital. You have the right to know what actually happened in 2020 in the months preceding J4, 5, and 6. You have the right to see the digital evidence of what truly happened in your capital.
I cut about 6 minutes out of this video because this is Laura Logan's show, and Clay Higgins is a congressman speaking for all Americans about a gigantically important and still unresolved issue over 3 years after it began, a coup d'etat against the American people. They took our government away from us, and they did it so skillfully, so deceitfully, with the full collusion and information suppression by at least half the American media, that half the population still can't believe it. I don't think Laura will be offended by us putting this up, because our audience is not her audience, and this needs to get out to our audience, because as Laura said, time is getting short. The next election will be here before we know it. I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of world freedom. Good day.